So thank you so much. This is joint work with Lior, Kovalio, Noam, Nisan, and Assaf. And before I start telling you about the matching market that we designed for Israeli gap year programs, let me first tell you a bit about how it is to grow up in Israel. So much like in other countries, we have 6 years of preschool, 6 years of elementary school, 6 years of middle and high school. And then, unlike many other countries, we have 3 years of mandatory military service. Then we go for 1 year for a big trip around the world to forget about what we did in the military service. And then we start real life at the age of 22. And if that's not late enough for you, then in the last few years, it's been very common for teens to take an additional gap year before the military service and after high school, so they start life even later than that. And the most popular way to take this gap year is to go to what's called a pre-military academy. That's what they're called, but they're only pre-military in the chronological sense. You don't teach you how to be a better soldier or something like that. You just go there before the army. You study quote unquote non-useful stuff. So you study about society around you and stuff like that. You don't get any certificate. You volunteer. You live in far locations, bad neighborhoods, cramped apartments, and you actually pay for all of that. And if you ask them why they pay for that, they would tell you that they get to know the world around them, they think about society around them, they make friends, they influence people. And if you ask their parents why they support that, then they would tell you that kids grow up and it provides kind of a bridge toward the independence of being in the army by themselves. So the three kinds of PMAs in Israel, there's the religious, secular, and so-called mixed secular religious. So the secular and the mixed ones are called the general PMAs. Those are the ones that we're going to talk about today. And even within these two groups, there's a very wide variety in geographical locations, social, political orientation, activity mix. So there are very, very strong opinions to candidates about where they want to go. So up until 2017, the way that candidates would be matched to PMAs was as follows. The PMAs, each of them is allocated a number of deferred military service slots from the army, because the military service postponement has to be approved. And then starting October, the PMAs would advertise to high school seniors. They would actually send representatives to high school to convince the students that they should come. And between October and February, the candidates would visit the PMAs that they're possibly interested in. The PMAs would interview them. They would kind of interview the PMAs. And it would be kind of an accept as you go kind of system. They would get offers. They would decide if they want to keep on shopping or commit, et cetera, et cetera. And there were a lot of problems with this mechanism. There's vast overdemand by the students. There are many more people who want to go volunteer and pay for that than there are slots to do that. Even despite that, there's wild competition between the PMAs for the stars, if you want to call them. The PMAs would give exploding offers because the PMAs would want to build a group in real time. They would want to know what group they have so far before they give the next offer. So this means that the candidates must accept, reject with incomplete information. The PMAs have to give offers with incomplete information. This creates a lot of inefficiency. Many candidates get a lot of rejections before they get any positive answers. There's much uncertainty, much doubt. This whole thing intimidated many candidates with lower self-esteem. This caused too many of the matched candidates to be from the quote-unquote social elite. And our involvement with this project actually started with such an exploding offer being given to Noam, to Noam's daughter. And Noam is my co-author and advisor. And this was early 2017. And in March 2017, we searched and online we found a website of what's called the Joint Council of PMAs. We weren't sure what that means exactly, but we decided why not? Let's send a cold call email to their CEO. So, dear Danny, that's Noam, I'm a father and a professor. Here's the link to a popular news article about stable matchings. Let us do a centralized matching for you. And let me jump to the end before we talk about the middle. In October, 5 months later, in October 2017, our online server opened for candidate registration. And in January 2018, we output the first matching that we did for them. And the rest of this talk is going to be about what happened between March and October. So which mechanism we decided to run? It won't surprise a lot of people here to know that it's a variant of Galen-Shapley's deferred acceptance algorithm. Why? Well, it's tried and true. Hospitals, school choice, many other clearinghouses. It was very important for the PMAs to remain educationally independent, for each of them to rank separately. And also it was very important to have explainable results. If a PMA didn't get a certain candidate, we needed to give them an answer about why that happened and not just say greater good or something like that. And we also need to have strategic guarantees. We'll talk about that later. So these two things ruled out integer programming approaches or linear programming approaches. So, okay, we decided variant of Gale-Shapley. What's left? Well, when you design an actual mechanism, everything else is left. Understand the requirements, define the problem, which variant of Gale and Shapley, measure how good it is, deal with people, everything else. So just that we're in sync, let's talk about Gale and Shapley's deferred acceptance algorithm for a moment. So each candidate ranks the PMAs she's interested in order of from most preferred to least preferred. Each PMA describes its preferences. We're going to talk about what describe means. And we're going to repeat, each candidate proposes to her most preferred PMA that has not yet previously rejected her. And each PMA would look at all of the candidates that would propose to it, and would keep its most preferred subset of these proposers. So, and then it would reiterate, each candidate who got rejected would propose to the next PMA in line, etc. And note that the PMA's preferences really here are expressed through this decision of whom to keep among those who propose to the PMA. So this correspondence, this mapping from proposers to candidates that are kept, that's called the choice function of the PMA. This encodes the preferences as well as the quotas of the PMA, and we'll talk a lot about that soon. And the matching is called stable. That's the usual desideratum in these cases. If there's no blocking pair, there's no candidate and PMA that are not matched together, such that the candidate prefers the PMA over wherever he was matched, and that the PMA would choose the candidate. What do I mean by that? If the PMA were to choose among everyone who got matched to it, and in addition also the candidate, then the PMA would choose also the candidate. In this case, we say that the candidate and PMA form a blocking pair, and this means that they are incentivized to match outside the mechanism, and we don't want that. So the easy part is eliciting the preferences of the candidates. We built a nice web interface. The candidates could drag and drop PMAs, order them, say this is my preference list, and be done with that. The more challenging thing is how do we elicit the choice functions of the PMAs. So obviously they have preferences over individuals, but very much the PMAs also view a core part of the mission being a meeting place for the variety of Israel's society. So you had a lot of diversity constraints. They wanted gender balance, geographic balance, rural, urban, etc. They wanted religious, non-religious balance, not too many from the same school, avoid pre-existing cliques, a lot of affirmative action requirements, so from the socioeconomic periphery, minority groups, special needs people. I told you that a lot of these are located in very bad neighborhoods, so they wanted to give priority in case someone from that neighborhood wanted to join, to not seem like a outside force, etc., etc. And when we understood the amount of group preferences required, that's actually the moment where this turned from a service project that we just wanted to help society with into an interesting theory question. So to understand what we're going to do here, we had to take a very close look at the literature on quotas in deferred acceptance. I highly recommend this survey for anyone who's interested. So we basically there are two flavors of quotas in the literature. There is what you may call inter-institution quotas, no less and no more than 40 doctors in the entirety of all of the hospitals in Arizona combined, stuff like that. And there's intra-institution quotas, which is more similar to what we were looking at, no more than there are 4, no less than 2 religious people in a specific PMA. So the literature on this started with hard minimum quotas, no less than 3 religious people in this PMA no matter what. And result, the very interesting questions here are along the line of for which preference structures and quota structures does a matching exist? And this is very interesting, but when you actually have to build a mechanism, your conclusion cannot be a stable matching does not exist. You have to output some suggested matching. So we went on to look at the literature on soft quotas. So there's some literature with two kinds of populations, a majority and a minority population. So there's Kojima 2012, who simulates soft min quotas using max quotas on the other population. This is a bit wasteful because sometimes you get unallocated slots. And there's a more refined paper by Lior et al., a later paper, who says, let's give priority to the minority group until either they fill up their minority reserve, their min quota, or we run out of minority guys and then we fill out whatever is remaining with majority guys. Problem is that PMA requirements involve far more than two populations. They actually involved even intersecting populations, which is many times a no-go in deferred acceptance. So our approach was start with Lior, but generalize that. And actually, before I could even describe for you the choice function, we have to go for what's called a modifying priorities approach. We have to somehow elicit the choice function from the PMA before starting to decide what the algorithm is. So we had to design a language for elicitation of the preferences from the PMAs. And whenever you design a language for preference elicitation or bid elicitation or whatnot, you have a trade-off between the complexity and simplicity of the language. Obviously, more complex language can describe a richer set of preference classes. But on the other hand, more complex languages are harder to work with algorithmically, harder to work with for the person who specifies their preferences to you. So we had to somehow balance all of this. And before I tell you even what our language is, if I may be so bold as to give ourselves scores on how we did with that language. So we'll talk about that later. But in terms of expressiveness, we managed to more or less express almost everything. Cognitive simplicity, this was by far our Achilles heel. Let's just say that if your users are not tech savvy, then what seems reasonable to you may not seem reasonable to them. Algorithmic simplicity, this was very good by design. And lack of strategic opportunities, this actually turned out better than we thought it would. We'll talk about this specifically later. So what's the preference specification language? So each PMA, we give an Excel sheet. They would list the names of the candidates they're interested in, their IDs, prioritize each one. And then they would also say, okay, we want at most 25 boys, at most 25 girls, at most 2 from each school, between 2 and 10 from each region, at least 10 musicians, etc. And we really, really did not want to decide for them what these populations mean, at the very minimum, because Noam and I really do not see eye to eye in the definition of who constitutes a musician, but even more so for other categories. So in the same sheet where they defined who their candidates are, they would say, okay, these 2 are male, these 3 are female, these come from this school, these come from that school, these 2 are musicians, etc. And that's the way we elicited their preferences. That's the input we got from them. So how do we use this to define a choice function? So the choice function, let me remind you, there are a bunch of candidates proposing to a PMA. It has to decide which, yeah.
So I could say I want 25 men, and I decide all of them, everyone here is a man.
For example, yeah, that's perfectly fine. So, okay, no, that's not what I have in my timer, but okay. So I'd like to remind you that the choice function is, so there's a bunch of candidates proposing to a PMA, and the PMA has to choose a subset of them to keep. That's where the choice function comes in. So the choice function here that we use would be to traverse all of the proposing candidates in the order of preference over them and greedily pick the candidates who actually help us with the minimum target quota at the time where we pick them. But we never take anyone who exceeds any maximum quota. And then again traverse this list again and pick out the remaining people to fill out the quota, even if they don't help us with any min target category. So this really, the max capacity is a firm commitment, and the min target is kind of a best effort we give priority by traversing in the first pass, but we don't give any commitment. And I'd like to remind you that stability and the theory results that we'll see next are with respect to this choice function. So this choice function defines our algorithm, but also our solution concept. So some theory, Huang Soda 10, tells us that if there are only max quotas, and if the populations are laminar, in the sense that each two populations are either disjoint or one of them is contained in the other, then everything okay, meaning that the stable matching exists, you can fight it in a strategy proof way, etc., etc. And if we augment that by saying that if you also have min target populations, but they are pairwise disjoint, in addition to all the max target populations being laminar, then once again everything works, and we actually strengthen and make more concise Huang's analysis regarding the properties that the choice function enjoys in these cases. With overlapping populations, even just max quota, Huang tells us that everything breaks down. There need not be a stable matching and be hard to determine anything, etc., etc. And we show again that even if the populations are laminar, but even if there are two populations that intersect with minimum targets, then everything may break down as well. And in each of these breakdown cases, any reasonable variant of DA that you would think of is also not strategy proof for the candidates. And despite that, we were able to show very generally what we call practical strategy proofness. So we sat down and we spoke with candidates, and many of them suggested two possible manipulations. None of them suggested any other manipulation. And we were able to address these specific two manipulations. So the first thing, some candidates said, well, if we have 6 PMAs that we rank, if we truncate the last one, maybe we'll get matched higher. So we were able to prove that regardless of the population structure, this will not happen. Second thing, candidate would say, well, say that my first option is a stretch, but my second option ranked me really, really high, such that if I rank it first, I'm going to get it. Maybe I should rank it first. And we were able to show, no, this cannot help you. Even if you rank it second, you'll get either that or the one above it. And during the matching season, the candidates were so heavily pressured by the PMAs to reciprocate with high rankings, etc., that we knew that we had to somehow get the point of these across. And the question is, how do you get something like this across to a bunch of teenagers? And the answer is through a viral video on social media, of course. So here's the head of the Joint Council of the PMAs explaining to them how important this video is going to be. This is a familiar face, the person who does the recruiting, who explained to them how to do the ranking. And here's me explaining to them that they should not truncate and that they should not bump up PMAs that rank them highly, and that we will never divulge their preferences. And once again, friendly face reiterating this message, rank truthfully, no one can ask you to reciprocate, and you are relieved of any promise that you were coerced into making. And this is just one tiny example of having to deal with actual people while designing a mechanism. And post everything survey revealed that 92 reported bidding non-strategically, so we view this as a success. I could. Actually, I could send you the link, but Martin's going to kill me soon. So just to conclude, last slide, we had 35 PMAs with a total of 1,800 slots. Heavy use of intersecting populations by almost all PMAs, gender, geography, whatnot, even origin. They actually obfuscated the meaning of that category from us. We had about 1.5 as many candidates, so a lot of candidates, and we ended up matching more than 90%. A very high percentage got their first choice. We provided some infrastructure for them to do a post-match quota filling, which worked very well. And there were virtually no blocking pairs. Just to compare, Boston mechanism would have matched a bit less candidates and would have had far more blocking pairs. And the system was adopted for the foreseeable future by the Council of PMAs. Thank you very much. Do you know what this is, by the way? Does anyone know what this is except for Scott? This is a stable marriage. Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. So we did some randomization only in the tie breaking because, as I said, we allowed them to give us the PMAs in the Excel to specify ties in the ranking for their cognitive ease. So we did some randomization there, but more than that, we did not want to use any randomization. I alluded this when I said that the final matching had to be justifiable. Some PMAs really came to us and said, why didn't we get this one? Why didn't we get this one? And saying, well, we had a randomized algorithm, we can't really articulate that into words, would not have been good enough. And we knew that to begin with. So we opted to do something deterministic in order for that to be better explainable to the PMAs, why they did get this, why they did not get that. Thank you.